So we have our first speaker, Dr. Shubham. He's a well-renowned gastroenterologist at various hospitals now at Indian Spinal Injury Center, and he is my favorite gastroenterologist to go to. So let's hear from Dr. Shubham regarding chronic diarrhea, clinical approach and management.
So thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you everyone, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the World Physics Forum of India for accepting me around 8 to 9 years ago when I started as I think I'm still a very young but even a younger gastroenterologist who wanted to make a mark with his own clinical skills and own practice, and I have been very lucky to be accepted by all of you, the renowned senior people, especially to mention Chauhan sir, cannot forget Jasbir sir. I think Wazirani sir is not here, Saluja sir, and Tulsi sir, Kabra sir, everyone trusting me with their patients, and I'm sure everyone who's sitting in this room who knows me since 8 years has at least sent me one patient, and that has been one is enough because one is 100. If you know private practice, I think you know what I'm saying. So thank you, and thank you so much. And answering Chauhan sir, it's not about changing institutes. It's about sometimes the MBA people do not understand doctors, and sometimes your age does not define how good you are, and sometimes your confidence is more than what the market can swallow and digest, so it comes out as overconfidence. So I was an overconfident person wanting to change my hospitals because the old management thinks ghar ki murgi dal barabar. So this new management thinks me like a damad right now, so I'll drill them till the time I'm a damad. Joshi ji, thank you for making me a damad here. Joshi ji and I worked together for 5 years at Fortis. So he went there and said that aapko leke aayenge to aapke piche piche baaki logon ko la payenge. So I said let's experiment this, and the aim is to make a different ILBS on that road. If we are able to do that in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be really proud at ISIC. I really like the management. It's an aggressive management. I know people have told us that earlier it was not that aggressive and whatever, but today I see the spark in our CEO, in our CSO, so I think we can do it. So with that, I come to the clinical part, chronic diarrhea, clinical approach. So this is very common. As physicians, we see people coming and saying, as a clinical presentation, कि मुझे पतले दस्त आते हैं, कभी constipation होती है, मैं fresh feel नहीं करता. And this is a very common complaint in the general physicians OPD. So my aim of doing this lecture again and again is that we do not need to refer every patient to a gastroenterologist when you see in a patient in an OPD. So I've always told all my physicians, and after we have grown more than 1 million now on social media with Instagram, Facebook and YouTube, all my patients come to me with these 4 tests, which I tell everyone that if your CBC is normal, your serum CRP is normal, your calprotectin is negative, and your celiac serology is negative, you do not have significant gut inflammation, you do not need to see a gastroenterologist. So you can be managed functionally. That's the take home of my lecture. But I would discuss this case with you, which is an actual case which came to me in the OPD. A 20-year-old man, history of increased stool frequency for the last 2 years, presence of nocturnal diarrhea, large volume stool without blood or mucus, does not improve with fasting, abdominal discomfort, weight loss 8 kgs in the last 6 months. There was anorexia but no fever. So as I told you, this patient has genuine complaints which do not tend to an organic disease. So what are the things which are very common here, which will not be common in your OPD? So duration of 2 years is okay, that goes with functional, but nocturnal diarrhea, always remember a functional patient with irritable bowel syndrome, the minute he sleeps, the minute his mind is sleeping, there are no symptoms. There is no pain abdomen, there is no diarrhea, there is no feeling of incomplete evacuation. So large volume stools is not a feature of a functional diarrhea. The frequency is a function and volume is low. So large volume generally means your small bowel is not able to absorb liquid, because the maximum amount of water which is absorbed in the intestines or in the gut is the small intestine, and large intestine absorbing maximum water is the most common wrong answer. So remember, whenever there is a small intestinal pathology, the volume is large. A functional diarrhea does not improve with fasting, it is there. An organic diarrhea does not improve with fasting, so it is not a classical definition there. Weight loss of 8 kg in 6 months, like we had the Opocon right now, where we had this lecture where Amish sir told us that now the definition has changed. More than 5% of unintentional weight loss in the last 6 months is classically organic and not functional. So this patient is a classical patient of a small intestinal diarrhea. I'll tell you how we diagnose it. So these are the few questions which we ask as gastroenterologists when a patient talks about diarrhea, right? Every question will give us a different hint. And as they say in our medical college, if you can't make a diagnosis on history, you are not a good physician. So functional or organic, like I told you, weight loss, presence of blood, large volume, these are the things which point towards the organic diarrhea. Small bowel or large bowel, always remember small bowel is large volume, large bowel is small volume. Small bowel does not come with blood, large bowel can come with blood. There is no frequency. The increased urgency and frequency is a classical large bowel complaint because your rectum is the reservoir of the stools. Whenever rectum and sigmoid colon is inflamed, it is not able to store stools, so a lot of stools comes out. Is it diarrhea associated with malabsorption? So large volume diarrhea, small bowel are associated with malabsorption. Painful, painless, always remember the mucosa of the small intestine has 4 layers. The mucosa, submucosa, muscularis propria and the serosa. Pain is a classical complaint when the disease goes deep into the muscularis propria, classical of a TB or a Crohn's disease or an ulcerative colitis. Normally small bowel mucosa malabsorption syndromes like celiac disease, tropical sprue and Whipple's do not cause pain. They are classically painless. Inflammatory, non-inflammatory, not for today. So osmotic secretory, not for today. I'll just wrap up. This was the whole definition. Today we call there is no acute persistent, there is only chronic for more than 4 weeks. Always remember, recent onset diarrhea is not a classical complaint of functionality. अगर आपका पेशेंट बोल रहा है मुझे 2 हफ्ते से कोई दिक्कत है, तो याद रखिए कुछ ना कुछ 2 हफ्ते पहले हुआ है. और functional complaint के लिए long standing history चाहिए होती है. So this is again, as I was telling you, I have already discussed about this. This is a very important table from our textbook, Schlenger's Gastroenterology. It says volume is small in functional, nocturnal stools are not present in functional, blood is not present in functional, fecal incontinence is not a part of functional, weight loss excludes functional, frequency is intermittent, onset is insidious. Always remember this is the most important point. Take home, onset, acute onset of illness suggests organic diarrhea, insidious onset, what time se pareshan hai mareej is classical of functional. So again, diarrhea is from the small intestine. As I told you, large volume is small intestine, small volume is large intestine. Presence of blood, presence of urgency, presence of frequency is a classical complaint of a large bowel. So this is again a table from our book. A very important thing to localize only on history. We are not going anywhere to the investigation yet. So small bowel diarrhea. This is again with malabsorption. Signs of anemia. These are mucosal malabsorptions. Classically do not cause pain. Maybe an ipsid might cause pain, which is a classically different disorder, not for today. Without malabsorption, then this will classically be bhaiya chal raha hai. Bile acid diarrhea, secretory diarrhea, large volume diarrhea. So large bowel diarrhea, functional is classical, which we have been talking about, IBS, right? Organic with blood is IBD, tuberculosis or carcinoma colon. Without blood is your drugs or microscopic colitis. Always remember to ask drugs. Olmesartan is a very common cause of diarrhea. Metformin is a very common cause of diarrhea. We miss them in the OPD. So drug-induced diarrhea becomes very common. Not for today, I guess. Not for today. So I will just end my discussion here. I don't think I want to go on a DM lecture here. This is a lecture from my DM days, which was my seminar. I don't think I want to talk about all this today. It's just a very basic discussion with the physicians that do not send us patients. Always keep your patients. If you want to send us patients with red flags. And always remember, if a gastroenterologist does not send the patient back, don't refer the next patient to him. Thank you so much.
पेशेंट को क्या डायग्नोसिस क्या निकला?
Sir, ये celiac disease है.
सीलिएक डिजीज.
Celiac disease is the most common cause of chronic diarrhea in North India. 1% patients. The Clinical Journal of Gastroenterology, Hepatology, Dr. Govind Makharia, 2010, and Ajit Super Ludhiana. 1% patients have celiac disease in North India.
Can we have Q&A after the talks, please? So, next talk, Dr. Aman Kalra, you will moderate this talk with our neurologist friend.
Dear friends, for the first time, we are having a CME with Indian Spinal Injury Hospital. Dr. Aparna Gupta is Director Neurology, and she has graduated and post-graduated from Bhopal. DNB from Gangaram Hospital, and we'll be today listening to the new guidelines, the paradigm shift in management of stroke. Please take care. I would suggest you to keep your talk a little short and crisp, but more time for interaction. Thank you so much.
Sure, sir. I think the topic is such that it requires more of interaction, I guess. You know, because awareness is very important. Brain is complicated. Even the neurologist, it took like 25 years to understand it, to make it more viable and make it more active.
Dr. Aparna, if we have interaction, your talk is not going to conclude till midnight.
Sir, I have a very short talk, but I just want...
I am talking about interaction. We'll have interaction after the end of your, all the talks.
Okay. So good evening everyone, my colleagues, my seniors, and the first, I think this is my first meet to all of you. ज़्यादा बोलने के लिए कुछ नहीं है सर मुझे अभी. So the topic is paradigm shift in stroke management. अगर simple शब्दों में कहा जाए कि how the stroke management has changed over the time in last 25 years. So we know, first of all, I would like to say what is the burden of the stroke. This is just a slide which I have to prepare it. Annually, the world global burden is like 12 million. Out of that, 1.5 to 1.8 billion in India annually. And out of that, 15% in young patients. And what is stroke? Whenever there is a blood, when there is a blood interruption to the brain, it causes the neurons to die. There are mainly three types of strokes. Today I'll be focusing more on the ischemic stroke, whether it is because of atherosclerotic disease or because of cardioembolic. These are the regular risk factors. I think all over the physicians who are sitting over here, they might be aware. Because there was one phase of stroke, the physicians were treating the stroke. So they were basically working on the modifiable risk factors. So all these hypertension, diabetes, cholesterol, smoking, large amount of alcohol, sedentary lifestyle, these were the regular, modifiable risk factors. The one which has come recently is the sleep apnea. Sleep has, sleep should not be taken in a lighter mode. I'll explain later. So these are the newer risk factors, as per the ASA or AHA guidelines. Most important is the sleep apnea. See, one thing is that all snorers are not apneic. That you have to understand. But all sleep apnea patients are apneic. So whenever a patient gives history of apnea, you should always, do the screening for the apnea. Because this has come out as an individual risk factor, both for the heart disease as well as for the brain disease. Second is in the women's, why the stroke has increased recently is probably because of the early onset menopause, history of preeclampsia, endometriosis or ovarian failure syndrome. COVID has also come in a bigger way, post-COVID. So many patients had come with stroke, and the post-COVID we all had a very prolonged sedentary lifestyle. So these are the newer factors which has come in stroke. And I want to emphasize this on the newer factors. Now stroke is something a medical emergency, and we should all know to address the acute symptoms of the stroke. So this is basically a mnemonic by the ASA. We should learn. First it was fast, now it has been modified as be fast. Stroke is acute. So whenever there is an acute balance issue, B stands for balance, E stands for eye symptoms. There is loss of vision, there is blurring of vision or double vision. F stands for the facial drooping, A stands for arm weakness, and H stands for the slurring. Either there is a slurring of speech or the person is not able to speak, like aphasia. If these symptoms are present, these are the warning signs of the stroke, T is time to call the emergency of the nearest hospital you have. Now, how earlier the stroke was treated? We used to do check the vitals, then there was a scoring on which the neurologist used to do it. The CT was done. If there is no bleed, we were put on regular antiplatelets or statins. Yes. After the introduction of reperfusion therapy in 1995, that is after the NITS trial, we started using alteplase. So for this thrombolysis therapy was used, but it was time bound. We could use it only for 3 hours. So this is how the stroke was till before 2000. So I would just like to bring about the history of the stroke. As you can see, before 1995, I'm not using it rightly, I guess. how to do it. Till 1995, the stroke was treated in a very conventional way. CT was done, bleed was there. If there is a bleed or no bleed, start with the antiplatelets, statins, regular physiotherapy, just wait and watch. After 1995, with the NIMS trial, the reperfusion therapies have come in the form of alteplase. Then it was 2015, that is the further evolution, the role of the neurointerventionist in the form of mechanical thrombectomy. They used to remove clot from the large arteries. So that was the second step. And the third step came in 2018 or after 2018 with the advanced imaging. There are certain advanced imaging like MRI diffusion weighting or MRI diffusion and perfusion images, which has helped to prolong the duration of thrombolysis in these patients. And the great, the neurologist, great luck for the neurologist was in 2025 when tenecteplase, which is the second thrombolytic agent which can be used for thrombolysis of stroke. Because it's a very simple way to, inject it. It is given a start dose. The efficacy is similar almost. It's not less. It is either similar or marginally better, but less of bleeding is there. Now, how the stroke, journey has evolved, there has to be something. So, I would like to speak about penumbra. Penumbra is the area. It is the live area around the dead area. Whenever a blood vessel is, it is being obstructed or it is being affected, in a particular area, the central core is the one which gets affected first because of the end arteries. And the surrounding areas, that is the penumbra, always remain active or live because of the collaterals. So this is how the aggressive or the newer generation has taken advantage of this penumbra and just extending the period of thrombolysis. So the black one is the dead one, the light red is the penumbra area, which is still alive. And these are the advanced imaging. This is the DWI imaging which shows the acute infarct, and this other imaging which again shows an infarct, but the yellow one is see what we have to see the mismatch. I think it's not for the physician, just I want to understand, because then you can be able to refer more patients to us and you'll be able to save more patients, and that way. So this is DWI, which the white one shows the dead area. The other one is the perfusion imaging, which shows the salvageable area, or the penumbra, the yellow one. When there is a mismatch, this is small and this is large. Earlier, these imagings were not available. Okay, whenever the patient used to come, if he lands within 3 hours, we used to thrombolyze it. After that, we have to nothing offer, only the symptomatic treatment. So after this advanced imaging, when we are able to see there is a mismatch, means more of the live area is available, we can still thrombolyze it after 3 hours also. So the recent stroke management includes supportive care, IV thrombolysis, endovascular therapy, the clot removal therapy, neuroprotection and rehabilitation. So what is the paradigm shift? Before 1995, when the conventional management was the line of management, at that time the saying was wait and watch. You have to just wait and watch, do the physiotherapy, give the conventional therapy. Then later on, with the evolution of thrombolysis therapy, it was time-bound therapy. If you are coming within 3 hours, you will be thrombolyzed. Otherwise, we had nothing to offer, except in large vessel and larger stroke we have thrombectomy, that too to a period of 6 hours. So only these two therapies were available. But now, with this current imaging, advanced imaging, we have image is brain. The recent saying is image is brain, or the image-bound therapy. So I hope I am clear कि पहले thrombolysis जो 3 hours में होता था, now it has been extended till 6 hours because of these advanced imaging. Secondly, the endovascular therapy, the thrombectomy. The thrombectomy is basically if there is a big clot in any of the big arteries in the brain, through the catheter, an interventionist can remove it if it is timely reached. Earlier the duration was 6 hours, but now because of this advanced imaging, we are able to we are able to prolong the period till 24 hours also. And thirdly, the tenecteplase, which is a great drug for the neurologist because it is just a start dose. Earlier we were giving alteplase, it was like in the form of infusion. 10% of the total dose was given stat, and then the rest was given a duration of 1 hour. So for 1.5 hour duration, you are increasing or delaying the process. As far as the newer drug is giving a stat doses. So the door to needle time has been markedly reduced, which is a great boon to the neurologist. And one more thing, earlier there was a thinking if the BP is high, उसको sudden down करना है. Suppose a patient comes with 200 BP, 220 BP, you have to sudden lower with NTG or something. So it's not like that. We have to lower the BP gradually because we have to save the phenomena. If the BP is lowered suddenly, it can lead to further worsening of the stroke. So this is the new theory which has come. And these kind of therapies are also helpful in the wake-up stroke, which is 20 to 30% patients are wake-up stroke, and around 20 to 30 they reach late because of the facilities are not available, the awareness is not there. Okay, there's so many things. So we are denying treatment to patients in such patients we are denying treatment. We are denying treatment to this number of patients. So with the modern imaging, we are able to offer treatment to these patients. This is for the large stroke. Now I would be also speaking about the minor stroke, which is like an angina of the heart. Similarly, in the brain we have TIA, that is the transient ischemic attacks, in which you can have symptoms similar to the stroke. Symptoms are same, but the duration it may last either less than a few minutes to hours, and maximum to 24 hours. Okay, so this is called as TIAs. They again are a iceberg. They are again a tip of the iceberg. Similar like the heart. Heart they have 3 vessel disease, but the patient may just have anginas, frequent anginas, and people do avoid it, landing up to major attacks. Similarly in the brain, if you are having recurrent TIAs, if the duration is more than 1 hour, definitely it needs thorough investigations, because that gives an indirect indication that definitely there is significant stenosis in the carotid. These are the major arteries which is supplying to the brain. So again here we have to offer it. Suppose the patient having recurrent TIAs and the duration is more than an hour, or the duration is less than an hour but they are having recurrence, these needs to be investigated. There are patients who have come with 50 to 60% stenosis in either of the carotids and they are having TIAs. They are not having major strokes. They are having minimal symptoms. मैम थोड़ा सा weakness आई, numbness आया, and then मैं recover कर गया. कुछ नहीं, मैं गया था, मैंने एक aspirin ले रहा हूँ, I'm fine. Then later on they may land up into a major stroke also. So for that we have to squeeze the carotids. Through carotid Doppler we have to do it, and the gold standard is CT angiography. If they show 40 to 60%, then we go ahead with the DSA similar to the angio of the heart, and we can go ahead with the angioplasty or endarterectomy. So these are the newer therapies which has come. This is just an ABCD score to find out how serious a TIA is. So the takeaway message is that don't reject an unknown onset stroke or a wake-up stroke in which we don't know the time. You should always refer it to the tertiary center, tertiary stroke center, which have everything in this setup. Secondly, onset with stroke-like symptoms followed by unconsciousness. If the patient is having weakness followed by sudden unconsciousness, always suspect a big stroke, a large vessel stroke. You should always refer it to a center with thrombectomy. All stroke centers are not having thrombectomy services. Every stroke center, I must say, they are having thrombolysis but not thrombectomy service. So if there is a large stroke, the patient should go there. Because if the thrombolysis fails, at least the patient can opt for the thrombectomy service. And don't avoid mini strokes. So this is a takeaway message.
Very good.
And similarly, there is a paradigm shift in the stroke rehabilitation also. So earlier it was, it was the neurologist, the PMR, the psychologist, OT, PT team, cognitive therapist, solo therapist, and speech therapist. This was the, this is the group of therapists who used to work on it. I would like to mention the first 3 hours is the first 3 months is the golden period. So whenever a stroke patient you have it, ask them whatever therapy they require, whether speech, limb, or cognitive therapy. It has to be first 3 hours, first 3 months to 3 to 6 months. Again, there are newer modalities have come. We don't have in our center, but robotic assisted therapies is there, virtual reality is there, and brain computer interface is there. So thank you. So today's saying is that the brain health is the new heart health. So take brain as a heart and investigate. Okay? Thank you, Jesus.
So we have a panel talk today with Dr. Udit Gupta, and he is going to talk on diabetic kidney disease. Of particular interest would be how to diagnose early, and also probably the confidence trial also. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to be among all the respected physicians here. So I will be talking about one of the common topic, diabetic kidney disease. So this is a case, a 40-year-old man who is recently diagnosed with type 2 diabetes with an HbA1c of 8.2%. He has a family history, father on dialysis, mother at stage 3. His baseline eGFR is 92 ml per minute, and his urine albumin creatinine ratio is 12 mg per gram, which is normal. His BP is 138/82 Nm of mercury with a BMI of 28.5 kg per meter square. So what is this? Can we prevent diabetic kidney disease? So prevalence of diabetic kidney disease in Indian scenario is, all the meta-analysis shows that it is around, all the diabetic patients has prevalence between 30 to 50% of having diabetic kidney disease at any point of lifetime. So what is the pathophysiology of diabetic kidney disease? Whenever there is insulin resistance leading to hyperglycemia, there is formation of advanced glycation end products, which eventually lead to inflammation and fibrosis of glomes, basement membrane, leading to proteinuria, albumin in the urine, decreased kidney function, rise in serum creatinine level, and decrease in eGFR. These are the pathophysiology, metabolic disturbances, hemodynamic mediators, and eventually leading to inflammation and fibrosis. So what is the classical clinical natural history of diabetic kidney disease? Initially due to early loss of nephrons, the remaining nephrons start working hard, there is hyperfiltration, then there is microalbuminuria, which is within 5 to 10 years, then macroalbuminuria. These both are old terminology, now it is called moderately increased or overtly increased albuminuria, and then CKD and landing into CKD stage 5. So what is the historical rate of kidney function in diabetes? Normally a person with age of 45, there is decrease of 1 ml per year of decrease in eGFR, if he is healthy. In diabetes, it is supposed to be between 3 to 5. If it is more than 6 ml decrease in eGFR, it means it is rapidly progressing. So what are the modern diabetic kidney phenotypes? Earlier it was known to all that diabetes only involves globes, but now diabetes also involves tubules. So there are 4 morphological criteria: either albuminuric diabetic kidney disease with declining eGFR, non-albuminic diabetic kidney disease with progressive eGFR loss, rapid decline despite a reasonable control. So a simple but an uncomfortable question still arises: do patients with HbA1c within normal range or within target range of 7 still reach dialysis? So HbA1c of 77.5%, eGFR decline 2 to 3 ml per minute per year. Structural kidney damage continues despite control. So we need to have kidney specific therapies which need to be given to the patients. So why DKD was considered initially incurable? There was a late diagnosis, constant hemodynamic injuries, chronic inflammation and fibrosis ongoing, focus only on glycemia, not on kidney biology. So diabetic kidney disease is not just a glucose disease, it is a metabolic inflammatory hemodynamic disease. So can DKD be cured in 2026? Why this question still matters? Because DKD affects around 40% of the people who are suffering from diabetes. It's a leading cause of chronic kidney disease and at the end CKD stage 5 worldwide. Major amplifier of all-cause cardiovascular mortality. Most DKD strategies 4 to 5 pillar model. Glucose optimization, maximum dose of RAS and SGLT2 inhibitor to control hemodynamic control. Treating inflammation and fibrosis through non-steroidal MRAs, metabolic and lifestyle optimization, early detection and stage-specific therapy. So what does RAS do? It is indicated in all DKD. It is the first-line drug with albuminuria more than 30 mg per gram. It reduces proteinuria by 30 to 50%. Slows GFR decline by 1 ml per minute per year. It's the first and the foundation therapy in all the guidelines. Now then comes SGLT2 inhibitor. It restores tubular feedback. It decreases glomerular hypertension, reduces filtration and inflammation, 30 to 45% reduction in CKD progression, effective with or without diabetes, or with or without albuminuria. Newer GLP-1 agonist, it slows down the GFR decline. It has an albuminuric effect. Newer non-steroidal MRAs, Finerenone, target inflammation and fibrosis. Reduces albuminuria by 30%, 18 to 23% reduction in CKD progression, and it's an add-on therapy for residual albuminuria. So these are the different trials with SGLT2 and renal outcomes. Initial credence, now the DAPA CKD and AMPA CKD. So important role of Finerenone. I just like to discuss the trials. So this is the first Finerenone trial, Fidelio trial. Then comes the Figaro and then the Fidelity. All these trials have shown that Finerenone improves kidney outcomes, including reducing the risk of end-stage kidney disease and well tolerated in patients with CKD and type 2 diabetes. So what is the rationale of use of Finerenone plus or with SGLT2 inhibition? Finerenone decreases oxidative stress, decreases inflammation. SGLT2 decreases glomerular hypertension, gives hemodynamic effect. Complementary mechanism of action, potential for additive beneficial effect in CKD with type 2 diabetes. So if we give triple therapy, that is RAS inhibition through ARB or ACE inhibitor, SGLT2 inhibitors and non-steroidal MRAs, if we are using only RAS and SGLT2, the end-stage renal disease reaches by 15 years. But if we are using triple therapy, we are retarding the progression of CKD and the end stage reaches by around 30 years. So we are buying a 12-year time for patient to reach a dialysis. So cumulative impact, as I have already discussed, baseline no DKD therapy around 3 to 5 ml per minute. With ACE or ARB, 2.5 to 4 ml per minute, decreasing per year. With ACE plus SGLT2, 1.5 to 2.5. With all 4 pillars, less than 1 to 1.5. Near arrest in early years of DKD. So what would be the expected outcomes of that of 40-year-old male at age 60? If we have given only standard care, his eGFR would be at 35 to 45, heavy proteinuria, all-time risk for end-stage kidney disease between 40 to 60%. But with 4 pillar care, his eGFR at 60 is 70 to 80 ml per minute, no or minimal proteinuria, and the risk for end-stage kidney disease is only less than 10 to 15%. So still having a burning question, pharmacological pillar address only hemodynamic and metabolic pathway, but do they fully address metabolic and nutritional burden? So what does KidGo guidelines suggest for the nutrition of the patient who are suffering from diabetic kidney disease? They say avoid high protein intake, more than 1.3 gram per kg in adults with CKD who are at risk of progression. If we are using alpha ketonologue, the recommended very low protein diet is 0.3 to 0.4 gram per kg body weight, supplemented with essential amino acids or ketonologue. So what is the mechanism of action of keto acid analogs? So keto analogs are structurally similar to essential amino acids, but without an amino group. So a keto acid analog with amino acid, there is a missing amino group. Once inside the body, they pick up the nitrogen from the waste nitrogen pool and get converted into usable essential amino acids. So normally when we eat protein converted into amino acid, into nitrogen and then into the urea. In kidney disease, nitrogen start building up and start causing uremia or uremic symptoms. With keto-analogs, we are giving essential amino acids, but there is no nitrogen group, so there is reduced urea formation, reduced chances of uremic symptoms. So the beneficial effect of keto-analogs: delay the time to dialysis, may slow progression of eGFR decline, decreases uremic toxins, better blood pressure control, reduces proteinuria. It has shown improved insulin sensitivity, improved lipid profile, improved calcium and phosphate metabolism, correction of metabolic acidosis, and prevents malnutrition. So keto-analogs correspond to these essential amino acids: leucine, isoleucine, valine, phenylalanine, and methionine. They are usually given as calcium salts in fixed dose combination. So these are the study groups which are going on. So a typical modern DKD trajectory would be a 40-year-old man with diabetes, early decline detected and treated, 5-pillar therapy initiated, stable kidney function into his older age. So can diabetic kidney disease be halted? Yes. DKD is no longer inevitably progressive. Trajectory can be modified with early action. Goal is to outlive kidney disease. Functional stabilization and long-term eGFR stability are achievable. So one powerful mindset shift. The think of kidney protection like retirement planning. My actually used to teach me like that. Small action now, massive protection later. Waiting for kidney problem is already late. You are doing the right preventing thinking already. So it's a retirement plan. So current situation is urine ACR is often overlooked. eGFR is not checked routinely. High risk patient not monitored frequently. So our vision should be building the gaps, requiring awareness plus structured screening by every diabetologist and endocrinologist. So role of primary care physicians. Most DKD patients are first seen by primary care physicians. Primary care physicians detect DKD early. It depends on them to detect early or late. Delayed screening is the major cause of late nephrology referral. Early urine albumin creatinine ratio and eGFR testing enables remission strategies. So my takeaway is screen urine albumin creatinine ratio early, even with normal creatinine. Start SGLT2 inhibitor early, not late. Look beyond HbA1c, inflammatory markers, acid-base status matters. Refer early, don't wait for eGFR less than 30. Think combination strategy, not monotherapy. So act urgently, not as in chronic inability. Initiate combination therapy early, track eGFR slope closely, escalate therapy if needed, engage primary care physicians for early detection. Thank you.
Wow. Udit, you can please come here. Lights on kar dena bhai. We had 3 wonderful sessions. So what is the carry home message? The carry home message for us is we have a wonderful gastroenterologist at Indian Spinal Injury, Dr. Shubham Bats. We have a wonderful neurologist, Dr. Aparna at Indian Spinal Injury. And we have a wonderful nephrologist, Dr. Udit at Indian Spinal Injury. हर चीज़ है वहाँ पे अवेलेबल, बस आप मरीज भेजो, ठीक है ना, वो जरूरी है. तो ये कैरी होम मैसेज है, ठीक है ना. तो सबसे ज़्यादा जरूरी चीज़ ये. और I would give it to my first moderator, Dr. Tulsi sir, to set the context for question answer sessions. I would personally request him to keep his own questions short so that we can have involvement of other people also. Sir, मेरी आपसे request है, अगर आप मानो तो इल्तिजा समझिए.
So, friends, we must confess all the 3 speakers spoke very vividly and an update on what is true today. So let me start with the last speaker, Dr. Udit. We have a mic for him, Dr. Chauhan?
Yes.
So, how early can you diagnose CKD and what is today, whether it is a UACR or whether it is the eGFR based on serum creatinine or based on cystatin C levels? Dr. Sir.
So we can early diagnose diabetic kidney disease, just not with the creatinine level. If any patient who has diabetes, who has moderately increased urine albumin creatinine ratio, that is more than 30 grams, with diabetic retinopathy, is suffering from diabetic nephropathy. With diabetic retinopathy, is suffering from diabetic nephropathy.
Is there a period whether you need to be, have at least 3 consecutive specimens or at an interval of 3 to 6 months? Not one.
Not one obviously, but for a constant period of time, for 3 months, we need to track it.
Yeah, 3
We need
months.
to track
At
it.
least three readings which would be elevated. We diagnose this. So apart from UACR, talk us about the EGFR based on cystatin C and based on serum creatinine levels.
So both serum creatinine and cystatin C are indirect markers of GFR, though therefore it is estimated GFR.
So what is the importance of having a cystatin C level, sir, in place of serum creatinine?
Serum creatinine cannot be assessed in every patient. It has some difference in calculating EGFR, such as if a patient who is malnutrited, since creatinine comes from the protein. If a patient is malnutrited, then it may overestimate or underestimate EGFR. So we need to incorporate cystatin C always. So better to have a combined creatinine and cystatin C formulation for EPI patient to estimate the EGFR.
What about the discordance between the serum cystatin, EGFR based, or serum creatinine? There's some discordance. Talk us about that.
I didn't get it.
Okay, so your serum creatinine may be high, your serum cystatin may be low. So patients who are, over muscular or underweight, and probably elderly patients, see, in such like patients, cystatin C probably would give you a better diagnosis as compared to serum creatinine levels. So, tell us about these.
So I basically tell patients do both creatinine as well as cystatin C in estimating EGFR using EPI equation, combined creatinine cystatin C.
Especially in patients who are probably elderly, patients who either have muscular dystrophy or who have muscular body. So these probably patients would do well if you get for a cystatin C levels. Okay, sir, wonderful. So SGLT2 inhibitors probably the first line of therapy today.
RAS inhibition is the first line.
RAS
with
SGLT2 inhibitor, and if albuminuria persists, then probably you think of adding a non-steroidal MRA. So talk us also about the confidence trial. They talked about combining EMPA with Fineron. So singularly probably would not cause so much reduction in albuminuria as compared to if you combine the two salts. So that was the confidence trial I was talking about.
But what KitGood guidelines suggest is we start with RAS inhibition with the maximum dose with SGLT2 inhibitor. If using both these drugs, the albumin creatinine ratio is still less than 300 mg, then as an add-on therapy you should use Finerenone.
Absolutely. So can we go to the next talk, Dr. Chauhan, or some questions from the audience for Dr. Udit?
You ask your question.
I'll finish my question with Dr. Udit. Dr. Kalra.
Very nice talk, Dr. Aparna. So ma'am, very nicely you had taken us to change from time his brain to imaging his brain. I want a suggestion rather, it's not a question. Like we have multiple codes in the hospital, in corporate hospital, code red, code blue, code pink, code black, code violet, code yellow. Could there be a code for evolving stroke? A person sees a patient in the hospital and finds that he is evolving, he is going into stroke. So there could be a code so that the team is alerted, that stroke team is alerted, and they come there and take action like we have code blue. So what is your take home on this, my suggestion?
I think in the hospital, the patient either in the OPD or in the emergency. whenever the patient comes, even in the ward also, the sisters are being sensitized about it. Because the warning, the fast, the mnemonic which we are using, it is not just for the physicians.
Could you get my point?
Yes, sir.
So if a code is there, the team, the first responder or the rapid response team of the stroke, that should take care of the patient immediately.
Yeah, definitely, sir. We already have one this code, our rapid response code. We already have it. But stroke is not included in that.
And that's what my suggestion was.
Sure.
So are there mobile stroke units available in Delhi? I am not aware.
I am not aware. So only in Chennai and one in Hyderabad. So the south has come up with the stroke mobile units, but not in North India so far.
So the neuroprotector was one of the suggestions, and it's in the pipeline also, that Nerimetin NA1, is it in the pipeline coming, or it will be taking so much time because it protects the neurons in case of stroke?
Yes, sir.
So will it be given before thrombolysis or after that? What is take home? Because if it is given before, then that connective place will have its interaction with the medicine.
So normally we give neuroprotection, they are still available, but it's a very subjective. The studies are subjective. Neither they have very good effect nor bad effects. Okay, we are using Cimetoli. We are using other neuroprotective. Selagenix is the company which has come, in which those drugs are acting on oxidative level, on the cellular level. So the studies are still on. It's not the right time to say they are going to be very useful, but since they are not causing any side effects or anything, we are adding on.
So Dr. Aparna, talk us about regarding the EVT. Is now the standard of care for all LVOs, basal artery occlusions as well. So the time period has been extended to 24 hours and beyond because of better, imaging studies like CTP and MR studies, the diffusion studies we had. So to identify the salvageable brain tissue, this time window has been expanded.
Yes.
So beyond 24 hours as well?
No,
What do you say?
It's only 24 hours.
No, but the recent imaging studies with the CTP and the MR diffusion studies say even beyond 24 hours you can identify salvageable brain tissue and give EVT.
So sorry to say, but it was 6 hours earlier.
It was then extended to 24 hours and now beyond that.
So beyond that, I'm not.
Okay.
Just a little.
Okay. Now talk about the bridging thrombolysis.
Yes.
So what is about the bridging thrombolysis for the sake of our friends here to listen to you?
So bridging thrombolysis is the same. Earlier the window period we had for 3 hours.
No, ma'am. I'm talking about the latex before you give the empty. Giving tenecteplase or RTPA.
What is the difference basically?
No. So when you give this and then do an EVT, the success rate is much more better as compared to just doing an empty.
Yeah. So that's what I'm telling. Any kind of a stroke, whether it is a small artery stroke or a large vessel stroke, thrombolysis is the first therapy. But if we know the large vessel occlusion is there, the clots are there in the imaging, through certain imaging like CT angio, then we can always have that in hand. That is
Right.
endovascular therapies. We can always be prepared with that.
Dr. Amish Vora has a question.
Yeah.
He has some input.
Okay, now.
He would like to contest.
I would. So on this point, in fact, today afternoon I wanted to call Dr. Chauhan and said कि सर कुछ नया सीख रहे हैं स्ट्रोक में तो मैं आता हूँ शुभम के पास तो कभी कॉल करके पूछ लूँगा. So I was reading through it. I am an oncologist, तो मैं सिर्फ पढ़ के पूछ रहा हूँ. So don't take it the other way around.
It's okay.
February 2026, there are some 5 changes which has happened in stroke, and I would have loved to know from a neurologist. What I read, one is the blood pressure
Yes, sudden drop.
has changed. No, they said 180 and below is okay instead of 140 and
Yes.
below. Second is sugar. Earlier sugar was this thing. Now again sugar also has increased to 180 instead of 120. Yeah.
Till 200. Yeah.
Third is what Sir said. No, Sir, these changes which has made, probably I must not have seen. Third is Sir talked about before, and I think there is a trial where they said first do EVT and then give it tenecteplase, and then the 90-day mortality is much better. That is what I read, sir. So that's why I wanted to know what is the sequence that should be followed.
First is thrombolysis, followed by thrombectomy.
So I will go through the trial and again come back to you. You can
Sure.
continue, sir. Because this is what I wanted to challenge.
And 2025, the most happening thing which happened in stroke is the tenecteplase. It was used for cardiac thrombolysis. Right now it is used in stroke. And it is just a stat dose in 5 minutes. So you are decreasing basically from low to needle time. That has given an edge over to neurologist.
Yes, I think wonderful presentation by all the three speakers and great performance by our moderators. I'll ask a question each to all the three speakers. Dr. Shubham, what all are the facilities in Indian Spinal that you are doing? Are you doing everything that you were doing in Fortis? Or there is something that you are missing? And suppose I have a case of hematomesis presenting to me at 9 o'clock in the OPD. Are you okay to take it?
Sir, this center is a pretty, infant right now. But with the kind of investments we're doing, the only thing not available with me right now is an EUS, which we are in the process of procuring. So other than that, we are doing everything at spinal injuries, which is available at Fortis Vasant.
If I have a case of...
Yes. Either any kind of emergency therapeutic endoscopy we can do.
Even at 9 o'clock?
2 a.m. also.
2 a.m. also?
Yes.
You have a resident who is there?
Yes, sir. I have an associate and we have an MD medicine also. But we are 2 gastroenterologists and we'll take care of it.
So 24/7?
Yeah. Yes.
24/7?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Dr. Aparna ma'am, wonderful talk. I was impressed. Very simple, but you talk something about transient ischemic attack. And we usually were told when I was doing my MD medicine back in 86, I don't know how old you were at that time, but we were told that, yes. Okay, so we were told that whatever reverses in about 24 hours, is the definition still holding or you have revised the definition?
Same.
It is still the...
Same, sir. In between, there was one more definition, RIM, that was reversible ischemic immunological deficit, in which the deficit used to, reverse within 7 days. Sorry. Now that is an obsolete, so there is only one ITI.
Right. Suppose I have a patient who is known to me in Panipat, and on a rainy day, he calls me, and the highway is totally jammed. And he calls me and I know that this is a stroke. I don't know whether it is ischemic or hemorrhagic, but there is a CT facility available in Karnal or in Panipat, which are nearby. What should be my advice to this patient if I want to bring this patient and refer that patient to you here in Indian Spinal? What will be your advice? What should I do with this patient?
Sir, suppose the patient is in Panipat. First of all, get the CT there itself. You always say...
Rule out hemorrhage?
Yes.
Okay.
Then you can do the loading dose of Dicosprin. Okay. If the symptoms subside within 24 hours or maybe in 1 or 2 hours, he's stable then. Then he can meet us. We can further investigate.
Would you recommend me to give him tenecteplase there in Karnal? In Panipat? No.
Sir, it depends.
I have ruled out hemorrhage.
You have ruled out? Sir, TIA जो होता है ना, TIA depending.
मैम उसको stroke हो गया.
चलो stroke हो गया. Definitely, sir. Definitely. That's what the awareness is all about. You don't have to travel long distances to come to me. Wherever is the nearby stroke unit, get it thrombolized. And then you can.
So what do you recommend? Tenecteplase?
Tenecteplase is gold standard nowadays.
Okay. Right. Now we were also told, ma'am, when we were learning our neurology while doing active medicine, because we were jack of all and master of only gastroenterology. Before I met Shubham and I realized that there is something beyond Pentosate. Ma'am, I wanted to ask you that golden R still holds?
Yes.
The golden R still holds? And the penumbra which you talk about,
Yes.
that is
For the salvageable brain.
6 hours?
Maximum 6 to 9 years also, sir.
6 to 9 hours.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you have that perfusion diffusion imaging, 4.5.
4.5 hours. Okay. Right. Now, what is the loading dose of aspirin, ma'am, that you recommend for all the physician friends here? Now, मैम डिस्प्रिन की टैबलेट तो 365 मिलीग्राम की 325 डिस्पर्सिबल टैबलेट च्यू करनी है या पानी में डाल के डिजोल्व करके पीनी है। अच्छा मैम एक थोड़ा सा इसको कॉम्प्लिकेट करता हूँ सवाल को। अगर ये पेशेंट ऑलरेडी कोरोनरी आर्टरी डिजीज का पेशेंट है और ड्यूअल एंटीप्लेटलेट पे है, ही इज ऑन अ कॉम्बिनेशन ऑफ एस्पिरिन एंड क्लोपिडोग्रेन, उसके लिए क्या डोज होगी मैम?
किस डोजेस पे?
एस्पिरिन की बात कर रहा हूँ मैम, आपने बोला एस्पिरिन देना है। हाँ 75 और क्लोपिडोग्रेन 75 पे है पेशेंट। हाँ अब क्या डोज होगी मैम? कितना एस्पिरिन देना? Because most of these guys are high atherosclerotic node patients and they are likely to get a stroke. ठीक है? And when you ask them, they are already taking a dual antiplatelet.
So what I do, I like to know.
What you do, that is what I want to know.
Whether it is right or wrong. Because if the patient is already on dual antiplatelet, definitely I give 25 because
Still,
because it's an acute stage, and again I can add reactase also, the neuromolecular.
Immediately first dose? Immediately first dose.
Start dose and then later on work.
Right, ma'am. Now coming to, you talked about the tertiary center. And from my experience, Indian Spinal Injury is a good enough center. Good enough center for...
Indian spinal
है या नहीं आपके हिसाब से?
नहीं, it is a good enough center. मैं अभी पूछ रहा हूँ अगर मेरे पास, मैं मुनीरका में एक पेशेंट है स्ट्रोक का और मैं आपके पास रेफर कर देता हूँ, इस्केमिक स्ट्रोक है, लेकिन मैं वो मेरे से पूछ रहा है कि अगर मैं अभी जाऊँ या सवेरे जाऊँ कोई फर्क होगा, मैं उसको क्या बोलूँ? अभी जाना मैम, आप उसको रात में न्यूरो इंटरवेंशन करोगे?
We have everything. On call interventionist, if it is required, we thrombolize, the team is there.
Only thrombolysis or neuro intervention?
Both, sir, both. We have on call interventions.
Both.
Because window period is 24 hours. No, sir? First give thrombolysis, we see for the effect, and then we have in the loop neuro interventions.
मैम मैं सिर्फ ये बोलूँगा अपनी मार्केटिंग टीम को ना, आप ये वाला मैसेज दो कि आसपास जाके है ना हमें बताएं एक नंबर दें, डेडिकेटेड नंबर, किसको कॉल करना है अगर स्ट्रोक हो जाए तो हम किसको बोलें। देखिए मैम, शुभम का नंबर हमारे पास है, इमरजेंसी हुआ कुछ भी हुआ मैं तुरंत कॉल कर दूंगा, कोई दिक्कत नहीं। और ज़्यादातर लोग जो हैं शुभम को जानते हैं। आप अगले 2 साल में देखिएगा ये इंडियन स्पाइनल इंजरी सेंटर की रूपरेखा और काया ब्लड है, हमें पता है बिकॉज नहीं, मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ, आप टीवी पे नहीं मैम, और
आप बताइए।
हाँ, और सिर्फ डॉक्टर नचिकेत भाटिया शो में नहीं, उसके अलावा भी आप इनको देखें। हाँ चलो अब काम की बात करते हैं और सबके बिहाफ पे करता हूँ। Wonderfully talked about diabetic kidney disease, and you talked about many pillars of diabetic kidney disease, and you talked about ACE, ARB. You also talked about SGLT2 inhibitors, and you talked about non-steroidal MRAs, and you also talked about... Right. I wanted to ask you, now we are facing an epidemic of obesity, and we are using GLP-1 analogs, and there has been a trial called the flow trial with semaglutide. Okay. I wanted to ask you the benefits of semaglutide in people with type 2 diabetes and their advantages in changing renal outcomes. So is that another pillar now? Is it becoming another pillar in the treatment of diabetic kidney disease?
All the trials suggest the first line therapy for diabetes is metformin for sugar control.
Sir, I am now talking about diabetic kidney disease.
Diabetic kidney disease.
Forget about
I'm
diabetes.
talking about diabetic kidney disease.
अगर डायबिटीज में जाएंगे तो सर फिर बात निकलेगी तो फिर दूर तक जाएगी। आपका पीछा छूटेगा नहीं फिर।
Diabetic-
आप डायबिटिक किडनी डिजीज की बात कर रहे हैं।
I'll tell you what the KIDCO guidelines suggest for the management of diabetic kidney disease. The first line therapy for sugar control is metformin. Then we can add SGLT2 inhibitors and then GLP-1 analog. Through the pillars for sugar control. Since SGLT2 has both decreasing the progression of kidney disease as well as cardiovascular, decreasing cardiovascular mortality, we can use early. If even on using SGLT2 inhibitor and ARAF inhibition, we have persistent albuminuria more than 300 mg per gram, then we can add non-steroidal MRA with a dose of Canadian, that is 10 mg, and then extend.
Approach to a patient who comes to me with CKD, with an eGFR which is less than 60, or with an albuminuria which is more than 30, the ratio I am talking about, and what kind of a investigation I must do for my patient so that I can cardiac risk assess him. You know, that is my question. What is the minimum thing that I should done that should be done for this
We
patient?
should do, if any diabetic patient who has diabetic kidney disease, serum creatinine. Since serum statin is a cost around 2,000 rupees. 2,000 rupees. So serum creatinine, urine albumin creatinine ratio with urine protein creatinine ratio as well, fasting lipid profile, and a TDE. These four things must be done in the patient.
What are you specifically looking at in the echo when you are doing the echo for the patient? What is the specific thing you are looking at?
Most of the patients with diabetes also have hypertension. So we have to rule out structural abnormalities, whether the patient has LVH or not. And second, obviously the ejection fraction. If a patient has symptoms of heart failure even with ejection fraction or reduced ejection fraction, we should use SGLT2 inhibitors with ARB and beta blockers.
Dr. Amish, Dr. Pawan idhar aa jao. Dr. Pawan is our neurosurgeon. He is at Balaji Action and is also working with Dr. Bajaj in Southern Enclave. भाई इधर पहले Dr. Amish और फिर Dr. Pawan. आजकल कम आते हैं Dr. Pawan.
So next time, sir, my turn before Chauhan sir and before Tulsi sir to ask the questions. So JAMA Network, so JAMA Journal, May 7, 2026. Choice 2 trial has been registered. What I was telling you about that. Intra-arterial atelectaplase after EVT has shown better survival compared to individual. No, sir, JAMA में लिखा है. मैं नहीं बोल रहा हूँ. आप सर लाने से कुछ change नहीं होगा. So I just want, before that, just शुभम को मैं तब से सवाल पूछने को तड़प रहा था. शुभम, first of all, the way you presented was short. I felt like listening to you longer.
Yes.
You were so wonderfully crafted between the. I really enjoyed doing that. So now the question, since this patient was celiac disease, there is some HLA subtype which is associated with celiac disease, but this HLA subtype. So I wanted to ask you, North India and South India, there is 10 times difference in the celiac disease. But if from oncology, if I remember, HLA subtype in North and South does not differ. So is it only the diet which is making North India? And if we remove wheat from our entire diet, will the celiac disease disappear?
So to understand this, we have to understand that gluten in genetically predisposed individuals, when the hypersensitivity is IgA mediated, patient develops celiac disease. When the hypersensitivity is IgE mediated, patient develops non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Right? Celiac disease is a very old disease. What happened in around 150 years ago in a town called Vellore, Christian Medical College. So there were these people, Britishers, Baker and Mathan. They saw an epidemic of iron and B12 deficiency in the whole population in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and the feeding population. So they came up, they saw this, and celiac disease was established, but no one was celiac. Their study has all HLAs, everything was negative at that point, 150 years ago. And then they saw that these patients had small intestinal bacterial overgrowth due to gram-negative bacilli. And they said that this is again sprue, but this is not celiac sprue. So they coined this term called tropical sprue. So maybe it is the Aryan race, maybe it is the Dravidian race that we don't know. But yes, North Indians are more predisposed, and we see celiac disease because there is more wheat exposure. But we cannot say that South Indians are not predisposed because of no wheat. Second thing, presence of HLA, DQ2, DQ8 does not mean the patient will develop celiac disease. Absence of HLA, DQ2, DQ8 means patient cannot develop celiac disease. So in genetically predisposed individuals, HLA B27 positivity does not mean patient will develop ankylosing spondylitis. The penetrance is less. The prevalence is more. So similarly, HLA, DQ2, DQ8, the prevalence is more, but the penetrance is less. So if this patient has, suppose you do this, and I am picking up at least one patient per week newly diagnosed celiac disease. I picked up 55-year-old patient today with celiac disease, reported by Vishu, HLA DQ2, DQ8 positive, anti-T3 100. I was telling Sir, Sen Gupta sir, around 3 months ago, around a year ago, I saw a 26-year-old female, amenorrheic since 6 years, amenorrheic since 6 years, married since 4 years, infertile, iron deficient since 4 years of age, never seen an HB more than 8, and iron deficient. Celiac serology positive, duodenal biopsy positive, on gluten-free diet for 6 months, conceived, first time hemoglobin 14, right? Patient was never picked up of celiac disease, and still we have 1% population documented, 1 in 96% positive with serology, 1 in 69 positive with clinicians from CGH. The paper, the population-based study done by Dr. Govind Makharia from AIIMS. So celiac disease is genuinely missed. Iron deficiency is treated with oral supplements and IV therapies. Patient gain and lose, gain and lose, gain and lose. But celiac disease normally does not cause B12 deficiency. That is what Baker and Mathur found. And that is where in the pediatric and the adult age group, they diagnosed it as tropical sprue. And with the advent of CMC Vellore now, they have called with sanitization, tropical sprue is almost eradicated from India because that was infectious. So this is what your question is, and this is I think a detailed explanation what I'm trying to tell you. But excluding gluten in a country who is already fiber deficient, protein deficient is not the answer.
Doctor, I would like to have insight from Dr. Sarath Gopalan. Dr. Sarath Gopalan is our pediatric gastroenterologist. He is also the president of Nutritional Society of India.
Thank you, Shubham. Wonderful presentation. All the presentations were excellent, but your presentation, I just want to comment. At the end of the day, when we look at celiac can affect at any age. The youngest I've seen in my personal practice over 32 years is 9 months of age, and the oldest I've seen is the grandfather of my celiac patient who is 84 years of age. As you're well aware, it can affect at any age. What I want you to comment about is pediatric IBD. This is something which most people are not aware of. The youngest I've seen is at 8 months of age. Even young infants can have inflammatory bowel disease. And it can be very, very bad, and they respond very badly. And they don't respond to the usual drugs. So I just want you to comment about your experience with pediatric IBD, maybe even 5 years and above. But how do they respond? Thank you.
So these two guys, Simon Travis.
So inflammatory bowel disease can happen in pediatric age?
Yes, it happens in pediatric.
So can you just clarify for everyone's
benefit? IBD is seen rarely in children, and I have not seen 8 months, but reported majority studies by two guys, Simon Travis at Oxford in London and Professor Vineet Ahuja at AIIMS. So our teacher, they have documented at least case series of 100 children 5 to 15 years of age, and what they have seen is ulcerative colitis is more common than Crohn's disease, rectal sparing ulcerative colitis is more common, and patients present classically with dysentery which overlaps with infectious colitis. And because pediatricians are a little scared, and we are also scared in colonoscoping a young child, so that is why we miss the diagnosis. And celiac disease is also missed because a lot of parents don't want endoscopy also with their children, which is fair enough. But the thing is, IBD and celiac in pediatric age group, atypical presentation is more common than typical presentation. And I think it is rare also, IBD is much rarer than celiac disease in pediatric age group. So, and you're absolutely right, it's very tough to immunosuppress these patients. So, it's a tough thing to like put a guideline to it. So, Chakravarti sir definitely wants to say something.
Dr. Chakravarti, and Amish, come more often. You really bring so much glory to the forum, and so much, I would say, you are so updated. Okay, you almost, at times, I confuse you for a cardiologist, then I confuse you for a gastroenterologist, at times a neurologist. The only thing I have not confused you for is a gynecologist. So I'll keep sending you oncology, don't worry. Dr. Ashok Chakravarti, another question.
Dr. Shubham and the whole team of speakers, you did a wonderful job, but I'm more interested in Shubham's presentation. You have very rightly said that ulcerative colitis is less common as well as celiac disease. Definitely, it's an underdiagnosed disease, no doubt about it. About 20-25 years back, we never knew this is something like celiac because we used
Sir, एक pediatrician in Delhi में इसको ulcerative colitis में मेरा patient है
हाँ मुझे मालूम है. My first patient was diagnosed by Dr. Shargopal Raynaud. About 22 years back, he came from England, and I had a relation of mine who was not just picking up, growing up. All sorts of tests were done, including Mantoux test, NESR, and thought of tuberculosis. That was the commonest thing for failure to thrive. He came and said, Ashok, मैं TTG कराना चाहता हूँ, IJ TTG, टोटल, and it came positive. That was the first case I picked up as a case of ulcerative celiac disease. Of 22, that was the recent relation to her. And the girl ultimately gained weight, got married, and had children. Touch wood, God bless you, Dr. Sharad. But that was that case when you came back from India, England. So the thing is, any child who is failure to thrive, not gaining weight, not gaining height especially, and height, short stature, and at the same time having infrequent problems of GA, either constipation or loose motions, we have to highly suspect in that suspicion of celiac disease. And very simple to diagnose. But yes, you said confirmation is colonoscopy. We must take histopathology tissue to diagnose. Putting a child on gluten-free diet without biopsy is criminal. You cannot put a child on gluten-free diet. कि डॉक्टर साहब आपने गेहूं नहीं खानी, आपने चावल नहीं खाना, आपने ये नहीं खाना, all sorts of gluten-free. It's criminal till the time you prove it. Actually, as you said, is only a byproduct. It could be positive, it could be negative, but still celiac.
Sir, it's very interesting बात बताता हूँ. So Ranveer Lavadia, celebrity podcaster, had invited me to his podcast, and we talked about celiac disease. उस podcast को देख के कितने iron deficient बच्चे मेरे से मिलने आते हैं कि सर इनको celiac हो सकता है. तो 1% कोई पकड़ा जाए तो बहुत बड़ी बात है.
And the delta onset is also picking up now.
Yeah, atypical presentation is more common. सर वो डॉक्टर A.S. पुरी, GP पंत के हेड जो थे अभी मेदांता में हैं, उनके 4-5 पेपर हैं कि tip of the iceberg disease, atypical presentation more common than typical presentation. Iron deficiency anemia in pediatric age group is the commonest hidden sign of celiac.
Short stature and anemia. Thank you so much, doctor, and the whole team of.
And Dr. Amish, my privilege.
What about CT and MRI angiograms in patients to detect inflammation?
Sir, so again, MR enterography is a very amazing test. Classically, it should only be done in patients who have a small intestinal stricture, because MR picks up fibrotic versus non-fibrotic strictures, and Crohn's disease with so tuberculosis will always cause a fibrotic stricture.
Talking about inflammation, the quantification of inflammation by diagnosis through the MR enterography or the CT
Practically,
non-invasive test.
Practically, I won't expose my patients to that, but the only practical road not
It is
useful.
radiation free. MR enterography
but
doesn't have any radiation.
It's okay, but it's a 55,000 rupee test which does not require anything. So I don't think I want to lose my patients for that. So practically no value. If I have a small intestinal stricture, tuberculosis will always cause a fibrotic stricture that would require resection anastomosis. In Crohn's disease, a T2 weighted MR enterography will show an inflammatory stricture which can respond to TNF alpha inhibitors. So that is the only practical role of preventing a surgery in a Crohn's disease inflammatory stricture.
Doctor, I want to ask Dr. Udit something. At what stage do you advise keto analogs? Because Spinal Center is on CGHS panel and CGHS doesn't give keto analogs.
No, ma'am. They have started to give. So preferentially in early stages of CKD, we should restrict protein.
Okay.
Because once the patient is beyond stage 5 or let's say stage 4, especially beyond stage 5, there are high chances that patient can be put on dialysis if he has uremic symptoms. So at beyond stage 5, I don't recommend protein restriction, but for obvious reasons, between stage 1 to 4, we should give protein restriction around 0.6 to 0.8 gram per kg with alpha-ketone.
With alpha. And CGHS is giving it in stage 1 also. Earlier it was CKD5, albuminuria more than this much. There were few guidelines.
Once patient has landed into stage 5, we cannot retard further progression. He has already gone into stage 5. So there is no use of using alpha-ketone. It's better to use between 1 to stage 2, 3 or in 4 with obviously protein restriction. The whole point of using alpha-ketone is if we are restricting protein, we should give amino acids as well. So for the better nutrition control. So it's better to give between stage 1 to 3 with 0.6 to 0.8 gram per kg per day and alpha-ketone obviously.
Thank you.
Dr. Pawar.
Sir, first of all, I want to clarify, Kazra sir was saying about the cold stroke. Most of the private hospitals are having the cold stroke. As previously I was working in Action Balaji Hospital, sir. Now I have joined Primera Hospital since past 3-4 months.
Congratulations.
Thanks. And one question.
मिठाई नहीं खिलाई आपने?
Sure.
Is there any name given to that code? I have not heard.
I don't remember whether it is no color has been given, but specifically cold stroke is announced in the emergencies. And the nursing staff, the neurologist.
This must be a newer thing because I have not.
It is in practice in most of the corporates now. And one short question to ma'am, specifically in the 6 to 24 hour period, what is the role of the medical management in medium to large vessel strokes and any advantage of the neurointervention over the medical management, specifically in the 6 to 24 hour period?
Whenever a patient comes even for large vessel disease, first thrombolysis is first thing is we do thrombolysis. We observe for it whether there is partial improvement in the symptoms or not, whether there is no improvement in the symptoms.
In 6 to 24 hour period.
Yeah. For thrombolysis is a must. You don't go directly for thrombectomy. See, thrombectomy, because all the interventionists are not at your hospital. No?
If available both, what is the standard of care?
See, if available, definitely if there is a MC dense size is visible on the MRI, and CT angio is showing a large clot, then definitely direct thrombectomy can be taken. But by and large, the rule says go ahead with the thrombolysis and then thrombectomy.
Dr. Sajid Parvez, my batchmate from 79.
Thank you so much for wonderful
One of
lectures.
the best GPs. One of the best GPs.
Thank you.
He is your go-to person. He is one of the best GPs in Central Delhi.
I'm not that good. That's why I'm asking a little question. Like people come to me with old age and hypertension. I want to prevent their strokes. I give them, blood thinners and statins conventional. What would the best antihypertensive agent I should choose in case I want to prevent a stroke and control the hypertension? Is there any particular one which I go to, or is a general routine rule that we apply for hypertension?
So for the prevention of stroke, I think ACE inhibitors and ARBs.
Which one?
Perinodopil is the one which I...
Is there really any evidence that acts better than others?
No, it is definitely because they help, they even prevent proteinuria and also. So I think ACE inhibitors and ARBs, they are the first one. If the patient is like above 60, then even diuretics also works better.
Dr. Aparna ma'am, the message should be at end of the day, the best thing is to control the blood pressure, whatever means. There can be a difference of choices of ACE, ARBs, etc. Perindopril in advanced trials, better results. But I think at the end of the day, it is the blood pressure control.
Yeah, definitely.
But there is no specific agent which has ever been shown that is better for stroke prevention rather than this and that, ma'am. I do not.
You're right, sir.
Not for
This is
stroke,
just-
but for kidney, yes.
And yeah, people come and tell us CDD is better than HRCD. I mean, is there any real difference?
There is no difference.
There is no difference in these two groups. No. And this is a subjective, thing. Why I am saying, because most of the stroke patients, they are already having the modified risk factors. They are diabetic, they are hypertensive. So that's why we prefer these.
Can I just interrupt?
These things influence us. People come and influence us.
Sajid, remember, when you talk about blood pressure, always have the distinction between dippers and non-dippers.
Yeah.
The guys who get into stroke and MIs are the people who are non-dippers, right? They have their, rather than dipping, they actually have their
reverse
spikes. They have reverse. So end of the day, it is the blood pressure. It is not the way or the means how you control the blood pressure. I think till today, whatever trials have been done, n number of trials, 100 trials, not one trial will tell you that there is a specific agent by which if you control blood pressure, it will